as you know, the ERA working group has worked hard on this and is really, really enthusiastic about today's conversation. It's now my pleasure to pass it over to Kelly Andringa and Roger Wood, who are the Collaborate Chair and Co-Chair.
I see I'm muted. Hello, good afternoon or morning or wherever you happen to be in the world. So you may remember a few months ago that the ERA working group sent out a survey with the same title. And so that's where our idea for this conversation came up. So I'm just going to let us all introduce ourselves. My name is Kelly Andringa. I am at the University of Iowa. I am the ERA chair this year, the committee chair. And I am a departmental research administrator. I work in the Department of Orthopedics here at the University of Iowa. So Roger.
Sorry, struggling with my mouse a little bit there. Hi, folks, I'm Roger. I work for InfoEd Global, an ERA system provider. I worked for many years in a central office doing research administration before I came to InfoEd. And I'm excited to talk to everybody about their electronic systems today. Next.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Minessa Konecky. I am a research administrator. I've been a research administrator for about 20 some years. And my passion is in efficiency and optimization so that we can get more done at less time. So this is obviously a topic that is very near and dear to me. And you can learn more about my philosophies at minessa.inc.
Hi, everyone. My name is Misty Ayim, and I'm a pre-award proposal manager at Oregon State University. I do work in Oregon State Central Office or its Office of Sponsored Programs. And I look forward to discussing the topic of security and access to online systems and how they help or hinder research administration. I'm also looking forward to the birth of my first son by mid-August of this year.
Congratulations, Misty. My name is Brittney Robertson Calwile. I am an ERA Collaborative Group Panelist, and I'm a pre-award grants administrator with Clemson University. We are under the umbrella of our OSP, but we are assigned to the College of Science. So I'm excited to hear, everyone's opinions about all of our different electronic systems and how we can, use those opinions in our descriptions of those systems to work better and more efficiently.
Hello, everybody. I am Erica Carpenter. I am a pre-award specialist from the Penn State College of Medicine in Hershey, PA. Fun fact, some mornings when you do attend to go on campus, it does smell like chocolate, so that is a really good plus when you work in Hershey. I am a departmental resource, and I am stationed in the Department of Family and Community Medicine.
Hi, my name is Daniela Gallardo. I work for UC Santa Barbara. I've been doing research administration for over 16 years, and I am in the central office, so sponsored projects. Something that I'm looking forward to is just hearing what everyone has to say about electronic systems and see if I can take any of that information and apply it to our office and campus.
Hello, my name is Natasa Raskovic. I am from the Lundquist Institute for Biomedical Innovation in Torrance, California. In past 9 years, I worked in research administration in the central office. I have a passion for data and systems, and I'm looking forward to sharing some experiences, ideas, information on how to use electronic systems to make research administrators' life easier.
If you remember in our survey, we asked how many of you use the shadow system, and there's a reason for this poll question. So if we could send out the poll, please. we would like to know how many of you use a shadow system. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about what we consider a shadow system. We're almost there.
With 206 people, we got to give it's a lot of time to not fill out all those polls,
I know.
but we'll
That
get
should went
great
really quick.
data.
All right, I'm gonna end the poll with 171. So, okay, so there's results. So again, so in our survey, we found that 51% of people used a shadow system, which I personally thought was a little low. And so again, you guys are saying that 51% of us use a shadow system. So I guess that is consistent with what we've already found. So Audrey, can you show the next slide? So what we've defined shadow system is any method to track data, finances, or grants that is outside of the employer provided system. So those of us who have homegrown systems or an InfoEd platform or Cayuse or any of the other platforms that are available to us for tracking things, any kind of spreadsheet you have that tracks other stuff or anything. So based on that information, if we can go to the next slide. What we found that why people use a shadow system is that, so we made a little word cloud. So a lot of it was reporting and that the system was confusing or that they didn't talk to each other. And so how to integrate things. I know personally, I have my own spreadsheet I use to talk to our faculty because surgeons are very, very skilled at surgery and they are not quite as skilled at understanding our financial accounting for grants specifically. So if we go to the next slide, I'm gonna ask you again, how many of you use a shadow system and see if it changes anything after we think about what shadow systems involve. And then we will talk about Danforth has more than one shadow system. And we'll get to that. Okay, if we get like 7 more, then we'll have the same amount that we had answered first. I would agree with you, Jen. Okay, so if we stop the survey, we're at the same amount. So having gone through the definition, then 78% of us now say we use a shadow system, which is more along the lines of what I was thinking would happen at the survey. And I am not skewing the data because that is inappropriate. But so why don't we open up to, I've seen a lot of the comments coming in that central offices use a lot more shadow systems or not central, departmental offices. I've never worked in central, so I can't speak to that, but maybe some of my other central colleagues can say if they do or do not use any kind of shadow system. I do have multiple shadow systems, as has been discussed. So is anyone else on the panel want to discuss their shadow systems, or we can then open up some questions, see if there are any questions.
I feel insecure if I don't have a shadow system, almost like I don't trust where the data, like it doesn't matter what data I'm getting or where it's coming from. If I don't have a shadow system, I feel like I can't trust it. Like I don't actually know and I don't have a good position to almost like start from. So I'm actually curious to know, like, you know, the people who are commenting in here about the ones who have the shadow systems. Like, I'd be curious to know, like, what, you know, what is it? Why do you use one? Like, do you read, like, because I know that my systems aren't good enough that I need the shadow systems, but I think some of us probably have systems that are good and we're still just not trusting. So I'd be curious to know what the combination of that is.
Mary
I-
Ellen,
I-
you have a hand raised.
I think for us, the reason for the shadow systems is in a lot of our university-wide systems, it's unclear where they're pulling the data from. And so there are multiple fields called the same thing, and we're not sure always what it means. So for example, there are several fields called start date. But they're in different places and they don't all have the same data in them. And so until you know exactly what that means in a system that you don't enter all those data into, we keep shadow systems to make sure that we can know what to check it against. When we see our data, we know that start date means the start date of the grant versus the date that somebody outside of our office entered the data. Just as an example.
Thank you for sharing that, Mary Ellen. So for our university, we use the shadow system for several different reasons. Of course, reporting and, you know, reporting data, recording data, and then also we use it to route throughout our institution for approval before we submit. So I'm not sure what our processes would look like without a shadow system, but I do feel like it's been helpful for us.
Yeah, I agree with all of you people, and with Misty especially. My question was, is it a personal preference to have a shadow system? Like Misty said, you don't trust data, so this is why you have it. That's the one thing. I'm finding myself really not trusting data, and I really, especially if I go into new system, I have to have some shadow system to make sure the data that I'm pulling is correct and that I can start trusting the data from the system. I just want to add another thing. Things are changing so fast in research administration, and reporting requirements are changing so fast. And people are just expecting that we somehow have all the data that they need. So this is one of my requirements why I need a shadow system, to actually track everything that people are asking me for.
You know, Adam has a question in here that I think is really interesting. And it's, Adam, he says, why would you pay for an ERA system if you're just going to have a shadow system? And, you know, I wanted you to say, Adam, we actually had this conversation in our Collaborate, like as we were discussing it, it's like, because I think we all are questioning the same thing, right? We all wish that our systems were the systems that we bought into would give us exactly what it is that we need. But I feel like by looking at all the comments, like it's actually really interesting to see how few of us are actually having our needs met as research administrators vis-a-vis our financial tracking system. So I think that's a really good question, but I'm not entirely sure that I have an answer. I don't know if anybody else wants to throw that out there if they have an answer for it.
I know for Santa Barbara, for sponsored projects, like we use Kai's to submit proposals, but we only use a certain part of it. We don't have like the whole suite. So then we also have a homegrown system to track other things like proposals and awards, reporting requirements and things like that. So I think sometimes people or institutions are not buying everything from A to Z, and then sometimes it's hard to customize, or maybe it takes more money to customize those systems, or sometimes you just can't customize them.
And sometimes we're not invited to sit at the table to customize them at the time when they're building all of the options into it. that happened with us with our ERP. Sponsored projects was an afterthought for a lot of the customization. And now a year later, we're saying, you know, we don't have this information that we need for reporting, and we're getting, well, now it costs more to add it in. And but we weren't, even though we were saying we need to be invited to this, we need to have these pieces of information in the system, we didn't get the invitations to the meetings that we needed to be invited to get those fields added.
That's an excellent point. I
I'm
totally agree with that.
really enjoying all the conversation going on in the chat too. I would also say there's a lot of really good topics that we could spend the whole day on this one, I am sure. I would say that some of the things mentioned is what data do we need? I will say personally, our financial tracking system is really good for actual accounting, like financial management of clinical revenues and other things. But grant accounting, as we all know, is not actual accounting all the time. And so I would say that the data they get is what they need, but not necessarily always what we get departmentally. I can't speak for the central offices, of course. So.
Also, I'm at a private institution, and some of the information is in our accounting system and some of our information is in our pre-award system. We manage our pre-award system, but our university won't allow us to access or to interface our pre-award system with our accounting system because of the nature of their security, because of the fact that we're a private institution and they don't want us to have open access to some of the information that would make our jobs easier. It's the security levels.
And I think
Okay,
that's important to realize that, you know, sometimes we, which is to say our institutions, are our own worst enemies. You know, we put roadblocks in front of us, either through lack of training, lack of system configuration, purchasing systems or implementing systems with limited features, or just simply not allowing integrations. And those all cause us problems as we move forward.
Well, Roger, you know, you've worked with us because our pre-award system is InfoEd, and we've talked many, many times about different ways to do that interface that wouldn't actually interface with our system. And there's just an unwillingness on the part of our institution to touch the ERP in any way, shape,
not uncommon.
Yeah, yeah. And so our shadow systems are created to allow us to keep the data that we need to do the reporting in a way that mimics an interface without allowing a real interface to take place, which is kind of crazy and a lot of extra work.
So to keep us a little bit on track of our pre-planned schedule, I'm going to turn it over to Misty to start talking about security and access to online systems. But this is some really great conversation, and I think Audrey is capturing it for us so we can further our conversations maybe in the Collaborate communities as well.
Yes, so for this portion of the presentation, I wanted to touch on security and access to online systems and point out ways that they can help or hinder research administration. And this is based on my cybersecurity knowledge, and it's also based on some of the results of our NCURA survey. So in terms of security, security refers to the protection of the information and data contained in the online systems that we need to use for research and administration. And access is just one of the methods that we use to ensure security and protection of the information and data. In terms of cybersecurity, this is more commonly known as identity and access management. And the goal of identity and access management is basically to ensure the right people have the right roles or right access to the online systems in order to accomplish their work. The goal is also to make sure that that access is revoked or terminated when necessary, such as when a person leaves a role or leaves an organization. As research administrators, we need to access many types of online systems, and we can categorize these in multiple ways. I just divided them up into internal versus external systems. So we often need to access internal systems. These can be organizational systems. They can be shadow systems, as Kelly discussed earlier. They can be system-to-system platforms, which Roger will talk more about later. And they can be individual systems. They can also be integrated, so multiple applications. And then we also need to be able to access external systems. And an example of this is we use external sponsor agency websites a lot as well. So we have to think about security and access to those types of systems as well. I'm sure you all are familiar with the research.gov, Inspires, grants.gov, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about security and access to online systems, we want to consider who requests and receives access to these online systems. It's not just us as research administrators that may need access to these systems. We have staff, of course, who are commonly found in the central or sponsor programs offices. That includes us, the research administrators, other authorized officials. We also have additional personnel within our organizations who work in departments or non-central offices, including the researchers themselves, departmental research managers, their research support staff. And there are certain cases where individuals external to our organizations need access to our online systems. At Oregon State University, we do use a system-to-system platform called Cayuse. And sometimes we have subrecipients who can upload their subrecipient documentation into the system. So there are cases where external users will request access to our systems. But it's important to be aware of all the potential users who need to access these systems, because the more users there are, the more protection you'll need to consider in order to keep the system secure and to ensure the right people have access to the right information and the right data. Next slide, please. So another aspect of security and access that we want to think about is whether individuals, will need to get individual access, shared access, and also what kind of roles individuals have. So when we're thinking about internal employees who are internal to our organizations, a lot of organizations have implemented single sign-on. And this basically allows users to enter their username and password once, and they're automatically logged into multiple systems at once. If your university has multiple systems, they're logged into multiple accounts, the network, websites, and applications. This is good. This does help in terms of research administration. It helps users with password fatigue. They only have one password and they can access multiple systems. It also helps institutions with the integration and implementation of multiple systems, but there are also risks associated with it. So single sign-on logins can be exploited by hackers. They can, once they get access to one person's single sign-on, they can log in, they can access multiple systems and do major damage potentially. So one way to remedy that is to combine single sign-on with other authentication methods like multi-factor authentication. And that's where the users receive a request on a device, for example, that usually the users only has access to, and then they can confirm whether or not it is indeed those individuals trying to log in. In terms of external sponsored websites, they have also, some of them have also decided to give individuals access individually instead of shared access, and they have started implementing login.gov, and it is tied to your personal login.gov login, and then they also combine that with multi-factor authentication as well. As research administrators, though, we know that there are some instances where shared access is needed to certain online systems, and so organizations have found loopholes to requesting individual access. And so what usually happens in those cases is that one individual will request access to an online system, whether it's an internal system or an external system, but they share the access with others through the use of a shared email address or shared password storage system or a shared spreadsheet. That's not is detrimental to the security of the systems, but they found loopholes to make it work, depending on the organization and depending on the system. So in terms of the roles, when individuals access online systems, their roles can be limited based on their duties. So someone mentioned in the previous group that, if you work in pre-award only, your institution may think that you don't need access to the financial information. That's not part of your role. In terms of external online systems, they also can allow you to have single roles or multiple roles. So, you can have an administrative role, you can have a programmatic role, support role. There are some external sponsored websites, though, that will limit each user to one role. And that does hinder research administration. It does make it a little bit more challenging, especially in organizations where, if there's a one-person office and that person wears multiple hats, or there are offices with a few personnel. Next slide, please. So I've talked about security and access in terms of the potential users, their roles. Let's also review it from the perspective of who manages the access to these online systems. So just in terms of the external systems, we know that the external funding agencies manage access to those systems, and we don't have much control over their rules. When it comes to gaining access, we just request access and they either approve or deny. In terms of the internal institutions, what we've learned from the survey and from my experience in terms of internally, they can be managed by single users, depending on how large the institution is, or single departments. They can be managed by multiple users or multiple departments. And our NCURA survey results did reveal to us that the results vary by the type of institution and by the type of office. So one of our questions was whether one person was responsible for managing users or not. And we looked at the results, or we compared the results in terms of private institutions versus public institutions, and then by central offices versus departmental offices. Next slide, please. And I did include a copy of the results from one of the questions on the next slide. But our survey results did identify ways that mismanagement of security and access to online systems can hinder research administration. And I did divide this up, or I'm showing it in terms of the public versus private institutions and the central offices versus departmental offices. But basically what I wanted you guys to get from this slide and from the survey results was that when security and access was limited, like a single account login, and it's mismanaged, research administrators are pointing out that they're contacted when they're on vacation for multi-factor authentication reasons. individuals continue to have access to systems when they leave organizations or when they leave roles. So access is not being revoked or terminated when they should be. And the results also showed that research administrators were experiencing password expiration problems, we're experiencing password management problems. These are all hindrances to us being able to do our research, to do our work, and they're also all detrimental to protecting the security of information contained within the online systems that we use. Going forward, we should just all be aware of these hindrances and work to improve them within our respective organizations to the best of our abilities. And that's all I wanted to present on this topic. If anyone has any information they want to share, any experiences, any ways that security and access to online systems has helped or hindered in their organizations, I'll open it up to the panel and also to the attendees.
You know, one of the things that, like, as you were talking about, does it help or hinder? Because as you were talking about everything, what I was trying to think of myself in my mind, I was reading the chat, is like, does this thing, we got this new technology, this new idea, this new way, right? And we all, you know, everybody's on the bandwagon of, oh, technology, everything's great, right? I mean, with AI now, of course, we're having different conversations, but until the AI situation started, tech was good, right? But I think that the way that, like, you discussed this, there were some things that, like, as you were talking, they were brought on to be helps, but ended up being sort of like hindrances. Like, oh, you know what, wouldn't it be cool if just one person was responsible for logging into this and taking care of the thing? And like, in an idea, sure, but in practice, poor Jamie is getting called on her vacation. So, you know, I think that that's sort of, it was very interesting, is like, not all of the technology or these advances have helped us.
Yes, I agree with you. And it also, with the implementation of login.gov, I don't know if anyone has experienced that switch over, where it has to be tied to your personal email address or your personal login. It does limit one person having to, you know, have access to these systems. And then what if that person is unavailable? You know, everybody wants to take vacation and go away. But then we have other staff in the research offices that need to be able to access those systems. And if you do a password reset and that person is unavailable, you're stuck being unable to complete your work. So it was supposed to help. It was supposed to make things more secure, but at the same time, it's not helping us in terms of getting our work done.
I will say, hi, I'm Holly. I'm with the University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture. And there are some options with login.gov. We still have a login.gov account associated with our service email account, so not a personal email account. We do have to have a spot where we keep that password so that everybody can have access to it. But login.gov does have some ways where you can get around one person getting that multi-factor authentication call. So we have it set up where when you log in using that service account, login.gov account, you get an option of 2 different phone numbers to choose. And so if you know that the person associated with phone number 1 is on vacation, you move to person number 2. So that way we can avoid that when we have staff out on vacation. They also have security keys where we have in the office, in the physical office, for the people that do work not remotely, we have an actual authentication security key that when they need to access login.gov, they insert that key and nobody has to get a text or a phone call for that dual factor authentication. We just implemented all that about 6 months ago, and it's worked really well for us.
Okay.
Login.gov also has an option that allows you to download a subset of codes. I think it's 10 or a dozen that you can download that can be used one time. And that's another way that a shared team, a team of people can share access to one account by using set of codes, and then someone can generate a new set of codes as you use them. You just have to keep on track of which ones have been used so that, you know, people know what will work and somebody has to keep downloading them. So there are ways to make login.gov work a little bit better. It's not ideal, really, but there are some options, as you say, Holly.
Oh yeah, and I did discuss in the presentation, like, organizations are finding loopholes to these issues. And I did mention that, yes, we use, you know, a shared email address where if something needs to be reset, the reset instructions can go to a shared email address, and we can go in and fix the system that way. And yeah, I am aware of the multi-factor authentication methods that can be used with login.gov. It's not always simple. And I know Holly mentioned that, you know, she has it set up where she has 2 phone numbers, but what if both of those individuals are out of the office? So it's just, you know, we just have to think through these things and think about how can we still maintain security and still ensure access. And it's sort of a balancing act. And it just points to the fact that, yes, they help, but they also hinder us in terms of research administration.
I did also want to speak to specifically login.gov. Some institutions may have a third-party authentication service. Our institution does that for our online, you know, login method. And so, you know, we would have to log in, and then of course, if our credentials are correct, it sends a push notification to either, you know, whatever device we have, mostly of course our phones. But there was someone in the chat that also mentioned that they didn't like the option of having to choose to you know, put something like that on their personal devices. So if anyone else had some, you know, some ideas or opinions about that, what are those?
Well, I recently, we used to have phones that would ring to our office, but now that we're remote, then there was a way that you could route them to your cell phone, right? And so recently our office decided that we would use phone numbers connected to Zoom. So when I have the option to log in and I want it to send me a text, and I've changed the phone number to the office, my office phone number, then I'll end up getting like a message in Zoom instead of it getting a text message via my cell phone. So I realized that with, I forget what system I was using, that was the option, or I could do that. So as long as the phone number that it's calling is my office phone number, then I'll get it via Zoom versus my cell phone.
Someone in the chat who I'm missing the name right now, said you could get the FOID. I would scroll through and find it. But anyway, it's in the chat. Devices, and I guess those kind of work like those key fobs we used to have 20, 30, it's 30 years ago. That would just recycle a number every so often, kind of like the Duo or authentication tracker does.
I thought those things were so cool when I was younger. I was like, if I have one of those, I've arrived.
Okay, great. So I think I'm past the time for my part of the presentation. So I want to hand it over to the next presenter.
That would be me, to talk a little bit about system to system. So this is a graphic that is just to give us a little bit of grounding to make sure that we all know what we're really talking about with system to system. So it's looks a lot more complicated than it really is. Basically, the gray box over on the left kind of demonstrates, you know, your local ERA system. An investigator filling out an application goes into the ERA system. You can immediately use the data from that for reporting or for other actions that may need to be done throughout the institution. That data then goes through system to system into grants.gov, and then again from system to system from grants.gov to the agencies. And so that pathway has has some advantages because it leaves the information warehoused at home, as well as sharing the parts that are needed, of course, with the agency through grants.gov. But not all agencies or not all applications for all agencies can go through that method. For example, EBRAP requires at the DoD requires that their pre-applications go in through CDMR or through CDMRP applications and other DoD applications. Pre-applications go in through EBRAP, and research.gov for NSF allows all of their applications to be put in directly, but they also accept applications, most of their applications, through system to system if you prefer to use it. Ultimately, if you can use an ERA system, if you can justify an ERA system, it can make things easier for your institution in the sense that you don't have to rekey the data because it's already there. So it's more efficient. Rekeying the data slows things down, creates opportunities for mistakes or omissions and so forth. So it's always good if you can avoid that rekeying, but it's certainly not always possible or practical. There's no doubt that system to system systems do have some overhead. They require some training, but on the other side, they do make things consistent. So once your users are trained in how to use them, then they're good for most of their applications because they all work the same way. So it's a useful tool, but it's not the end all be all, if you will, for every kind of application. And it's worth noting that it's really not relevant for non-federal applications because none of the non-federal systems or portals accept electronic submissions directly in that same way. So just a little bit of information. Audrey, the next slide, please. And then we will go through some results that we got from our survey. About 86% of respondents indicated in the survey indicated that their institution uses an ERA system of some sort. That doesn't necessarily, ERA systems aren't necessarily equivalent to system. So you can have an ERA system that stores your data that is still not using system to system. And as I said before, not every application, even at institutions that use system to system, not every application can go in that way. But about 57% of the respondents indicated that their institutions do use system to system for at least some applications. So Audrey, let's go on to the next slide, which then she's going to throw up a poll question for us all to respond to. So the goal here is, I see Audrey and I didn't quite work out the details on this one. So the goal here really was to use sort of a matching question that would let you match the method that you tend to use with the agency. But in any case, feel free to just mark the various choices that you do use at your institution, and we'll absolutely go ahead and talk about those on the backside when we have some responses. How are we doing with responses? And there we go. So About half of the folks online with us today say that their institutions are using system to system. About a third of institutions use Assist. Certainly there are, there's nothing wrong with the Assist system. It's important to understand that Assist works very much like an institutional system to system works, in the sense that you fill out your application online in Assist. When you submit it, it actually goes to grants.gov, and then NIH's other ERA systems pick up that application from grants.gov, the same as they pick up one that comes in from a university ERA system. Of course, a lot of folks use research.gov. That probably represents the bulk of the institutions that are with us today that actually have NSF applications going in, because not that many institutions use system to system systems or grants.gov's workspace for research.gov. But it is technically supported by NSF, and they are moving in the direction of increasing their support. Inspires, which is the NASA system, basically NASA they allow applications to go in directly to Inspires. I would even say they encourage it, probably, but they absolutely get many of their applications coming in through grants.gov. And grants.gov's workspace can be a useful tool, especially for institutions that for other reasons aren't able or haven't implemented system to system, but want a single interface and consistent a way of handling their applications. So thank you for those responses. And we can go on. So then we can take a moment here, and if there are any comments or questions that people would like to voice about system to system, we can take a minute or two for that, and then we'll move on into the next topic, which is electronic systems integration. So any comments that people would like to throw out there about system to system, or questions or concerns?
Can you show the poll results again really quick? There, thanks. Didn't know if you saw that.
So I notice Katie has said that if you're at a non-research intensive institution submitting fewer than 100 proposals, the cost of S2S implementations may not be worth the expense. I would just add on top of that the training and management overhead may also be excessive for an institution that only submits a relatively small number of applications that are going to go in through that system to system. But I think it's also valid to think about the flip side, and when you're going to kind of crest over that point where it makes sense, because there are real advantages, and those primarily are because the data is still in your system, for you to automatically use without having to rekey it. So I think there are trade-offs that you need to keep in mind.
It's interesting because Carolyn says, in here in the chat, Carolyn Miller from Maryland said they use S2S, but it's also expensive to keep updating it when forms change. So one of the things, when you're talking about like the time and the money invested, it goes back to the question of, is it a help or a hindrance, right? Like, you've got to watch that, almost like watch it really closely to find when it gets to that perfect point. Like, is it worth the money and the time invested to continuously update it based off of how much you're actually submitting? But like, when is that sweet spot and I'm curious to know, like, do you have any thoughts on like when that might be, when someone might be like, what, this is like at X number of grants, you might want to go to S2S or something like that?
Yeah, I I think that's very much a decision that needs to be made locally. I know of some schools that are relatively smaller, in terms of the number of applications that they submit per year to agencies that can go through grants.gov, and yet they, they really like their system to system system, a lot of systems there. I think to some extent it depends upon the people that are involved as well. If the folks that are sort of manning the front lines there are used to using that system and familiar with it, that really makes it work even for a smaller institution. So I think there are a lot of factors. I don't think it's just simply number of applications that you do in a year. Also, I think there are different systems out there. I mean, I do, full disclosure, I work for one company that does this, but I know, across the other companies, my own and the other companies that offer these, we all operate differently. And so, with some companies, those upgrades and so forth that Carolyn mentioned, may cost more than they do with other companies. There's always going to be some time commitment involved in maintaining your system. However, even if there aren't costs on an ongoing basis. So, yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer. In the interest of, I do want to sort of mention the comment that Christy just made in the chat, Kristen just made in the chat, because it's a really important thing to keep in mind, that it would be, I'm paraphrasing from what Kristen has written, of course, but it would be really nice if all federal agencies accepted their applications through grants.gov, which would allow everyone to sort of standardize a little bit more. Right now, we're still in a place that's better, but only somewhat better than where we were, 15 years ago when system to system sort of started, and grant.gov and electronic submission really was getting started. Because there's still a lot of agency systems out there, and there are agencies that require or encourage use of their systems directly and discourage use of grants.gov as a platform. So I think if more agencies used grants.gov effectively, it would give more flexibility to institutions to figure out what works best for them. So in the interest of time, let's move on and talk a little bit about electronic system integrations. Yep, so thank you, Audrey, for the slide. So there were several questions that I wanted to sort of run through with you here, the responses that we got. So about 85% of respondents to the survey noted that they have financial systems, presumably ERP systems like financials and human resources kind of lumped together, and ERA systems. And only a small percentage have systems for things like training or core facility management or research development. So I think, we might see, I think that's an interesting divide, but it does suggest that most of the respondents to the survey at least have core systems in place. In some of those, in some institutions, those are mostly only used centrally, though, however, which creates some gaps for the departmental level staff. The next question then is about integration specifically, and about half the institutions said that their systems were integrated, and about half said that they were not. And that kind of gets at the comment that Mary Ellen was making earlier, for example, at her institution, where not at all uncommon, where the sort of the finance side of the house won't let other systems like ERA systems integrate with the finance system, even though everyone understands that that might be efficient to do. And then the last question on this slide is about electronic workflow systems. And about half of the institutions reported that they do have electronic workflow systems. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is about 40%, not quite, but about 40% of institutions reported that they use electronic signature platforms like DocuSign or Adobe Signature. And that, in my experience, has been growing over time. It's not necessarily the case that you have to use those to meet electronic signature requirements for the federal government, but a lot of institutions are implementing those systems. Let's see, I'm just glancing at the chat here.
I just have to say what I said in chat, like out loud, because I feel like one of the conversations that we've been having about all of these systems is that what's becoming very apparent is from all of the conversations in the chat is how hindering the decentralization of the governmental systems for submitting grants are. Like, it's because it really does seem like all the challenges that we have related to these sorts of things are actually coming from that decentralization and so I just wanted to throw that out there because it was a topic that popped up and I wanted to share that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Audrey, you want to move on to the next slide? And so this asks, we asked folks what kind of or to what extent did they have issues when they were trying to implement their electronic systems. I think most people probably responded to this in the context of their ERA systems, so their research administration systems. About 65% said that they did have problems, and I think that is not an uncommon finding, and maybe 65% is a high number. I think that there's a lot of difference, and we weren't able to dig through the data from our survey well enough to discern this. But my experience tells me that the perception of problems will vary somewhat between central and departmental offices. And that's just because a lot of times the systems are implemented in a way that works for the central office and doesn't work for the departmental office. And that's unfortunate, but that's, just kind of reiterating a conversation that we had earlier. And then this word cloud just reflects some of the language, the words that we got back in responses to this this question. Then if we can go to the next slide, which I believe will be my my last slide. This again is a word cloud. We based on data that we asked for, in a word, tell us how you feel about your electronic research administration system. And as you can see, there's really a broad variation in how people feel about those systems. And we've experienced that in the chat and the conversation today, running the gamut from, fine to meh. So, so with that, again, if there are some comments or questions, great, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
All righty. Hello, everyone. Okay, so it didn't seem like there were any other questions, but if there are, you can always go through them in the chat. So the next topic is actually one that is very near and dear to my heart, and it's about the IT support that we get for research management systems. The reason why I'm so passionate about this particular thing is because that's actually where I've ended up in terms of my role. Is I'll be a research administrator, and then typically whatever technological system is coming into play, I'm the bridge between research administration and IS. And one of the things that that I found is that in every company I've ever worked at, both as a consultant and as an employee, is that there's a lot of thought given to the, finding the software, implementing the software, and just getting it out there. Oh my God, the cool new shiny toy, but not a lot of conversation about the support and what is really needed on the ground. This actually came up much earlier on in this conversation, way at the very beginning. Someone said this in the chat, and they said how when companies and organizations are typically picking the software, what they'll do is they'll pick it up here without ever talking to the stakeholders on the ground who are actually using the software and who actually know what needs to be done. So I'm curious, we have a poll, if we could throw that up there. What is your overall satisfaction with the support that you get at your institution for, oh, here, you know what, like, excuse me, let me vote in my own poll. There we go. Vis-a-vis the research management system. So we're not talking about getting, your login so that you can access the computer, but more along the lines of the kind of support that your institution has, whether it's in the form of someone in the IS department, whether there's a special research support IT department, or there's someone in your department who happens to just be really good at IS. Okay, I can't see what the situation is with the polls, but if we're ready to show the results, I'd be curious to see what people had to say. Let's see. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like about 50% are not satisfied or somewhat satisfied. And then you have about, wow, we have 8% who are very satisfied. You guys are so lucky. Like, honestly, so lucky. Get cookies for your IT people. I don't think I can talk about IT support. Oh, Kristen, I'm so sorry for my dedicated electronic system without profanity or tears of frustration. So this is one of the challenges I've worked in many institutions, not just in research but in other spaces in terms of moving in software to replace an older piece of software or introducing a new piece of software. And the challenges, one of the bigger challenges is one, how, when you are selecting this particular piece of software, are you getting buy-in from the people who are actually using it? Or is it someone at the top making those decisions? Because what I found is that when someone at the top makes those decisions, the way that typically happens is they watch a couple of videos, somebody does a training, comes in, and whichever one has the cutest bells and whistles that they really love, they're like, oh my God, that looks great. Everybody's going to love it. They're going to be so happy when we give this to them. And I've been in the room where people make those decisions. But what they don't think about is the on-ramp for training and IT support that needs to be implemented, on making sure that they are inviting in all of the key stakeholders. And in that case, even the best software system can become a hindrance. So if your software system is the greatest software system in the world, if you do not get the buy-in from the people on the ground, and you don't have an on-ramp that gives them a lot of IS support as they are moving into this new space, then it is very unlikely to be unsuccessful initially because people will resist heavily. Oh my God, Sean, we're going to talk about you being the IT support for a couple of modules because we're going to come down to that a little bit later on. That's a thing. And what ends up happening then is that there's a lot of resistance for whatever that software is, even if that software is good software, right? So people can get, I used to work in marketing and sales. And one of the key things that I used to talk about was, when you have a new product that's really great and you run out into the world and you're like, I have these glasses and they're so good, buy them, right? And most business owners are shocked that someone isn't immediately rushing to their door, tearing everything down to buy these glasses. They don't get it. They're saying, look how gorgeous these are. And the problem is because just because we've decided we're ready to share it doesn't mean the people on the other side are ready to receive it. You have to prime them for it. So not providing an adequate on-ramp creates that resistance that makes it even harder. And then ongoing ramp, offgoing. Yes, you need an offgoing and an ongoing. And most people forget about the offgoing. They're like, oh, look, we're going to get on something. And oh, just the off one, something just gets pushed off a cliff. That's always fun. And then most of the time, the IT people spend 6 to 8 months trying to fix what went wrong because of doing that. The other thing that is important to keep in mind when we're talking about IT support is that, and this is going to go back to what Sean was just saying, is that if you are a research administrator who happens to be a techie like me, then what ends up happening is you become the IT support. So now you're managing your portfolio. you're managing the PIs, you're managing all the things that you need to manage, but you're also a de facto IT support person who's probably not getting paid for that extra role that you just took on. And what ends up happening is that that very, very high performing individual will typically burn out, in which case you're now going to be stuck at a point where you have nobody to do that work, and you have nobody to support these systems, and you have a workforce that is not feeling supported. So one of the key things to sort of, and I'd be really curious to hear, and some of you actually said this, is there a support group for this? I can start one. I'm really good at starting support groups for things. I can just be like, hey, that's what we're doing. One of the, oh my God, so Carol talks about at a previous institution, one system was implemented because of a friendship with the higher up from both sides. I've seen that happen. And, in one of the places where I saw that happen, the system actually didn't work. They had to revert back to the old system. And that was not a good one, not a good situation. Let's see. There were several, so I worked at an institution where a new electronic HR payroll system was rolled out years ago. They were about to go live and had an open forum for the grant support staff. There were several questions asked about how we'd manage the effort. The higher level execs were very excited about it. Oh, this is great. I would be so curious in the chat, how many of you had a circumstance happen like this? Okay. The higher ups are really excited about this new piece of software, and they bring it to the research. They're like, oh my God, guys, look, we have this thing. And then you ask a question like the one that Minessa asked, which is, how are we going to manage effort? Dead silence, right? Dead silence, because a lot of times they don't take those things into consideration. So I will tell you my general thoughts in terms of how to mitigate some of these things are one, new software implementations need a lot of support. So anytime software is being launched and you're not being given an adequate support team, it's less likely to be successful, because there's going to be a lot of questions. And when there's we are all research administrators now, but we all have our primal brain in here, and our primal brain addresses change as, oh my God, that's a saber-toothed tiger that's about to kill me. So this new piece of software is a saber-toothed tiger about to kill you, and we don't have any support. So one of the key factors of success is to make sure that you are supported. And if you are not getting the support that you need, to reach out to the people, the powers that be, to be able to request that kind of thing. All right, I just want to make sure that I'm not going 39. Am I good for time, or am I? Yeah, I think I'm good for time. Okay, so I'm just gonna look at the questions and then see if there's any conversation that anyone wants to bring in. Elizabeth says that when the system isn't working well, it can take years to change systems. I think that's the other thing to consider, is that the on and off ramp is always longer than you think it's going to be. And it does nobody any good to try to speed it up because you want it to be faster. Like, we all want it to be faster. And so we're like, how quickly can we compress this line? It will make everything easier for everyone if you stretch out as long as you can to make sure that all the pieces are in place, because it's a lot worse on the other side if it doesn't work, because then everyone's greatest fears are actually realized, right? They're like, oh, we knew this wasn't going to work, right? And if we go slow, we have a higher likelihood of it succeeding. Okay, thanks, Roger. All right, guys. This is why I don't have a clock on here. I'm going to move on to whoever's in the Erica. I think it's Erica, yeah? Erica is next. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Minessa. I appreciate it. Really, really great conversation, guys. I am such a listener and so much reading the comments that I forgot that I'm supposed to be part of the panel and actually comment on things, so forgive me. I love this idea of ongoing training for people and for our systems. And one of the things that I can speak about from Penn State's perspective, I think we do a really good job of offering those onboard trainings. One of the things that I think one of our central office does is you're not even allowed access to some of our systems until you actually sit down with somebody and go through the training. But, after that initial training is kind of done, then what? We've all run into those situations, and one just happened to me the other day. I've been doing this for 10 plus years, and I don't know how to do this particular thing, or it's just not working the way that I think that it should. So who do I go to? Is there training about this? So Audra, I was hoping you could put up the first poll question, because I'd love to know if everybody else is given the opportunity for ongoing trainings. And I will give everybody a few seconds to go ahead and answer that. And then Audra, whenever you feel like it, if you want to post the results, I would appreciate that. Oh, I am really, really sad to see that the majority of the people in this conversation do not have ongoing training. That kind of hurts my heart, actually. I think that it is so important to get involved and to have something like this, or to have these kind of conversations so you know where to go. One of the things that I think that having those developmental programs and learning modules, and if they're effective, I think it slows down on, or actually helps with employee retention. Sorry, I started to say that the incorrect way. So yeah, now I'm starting to see people telling me about what, how those trainings are and videos and materials, but it doesn't necessarily help you to know which one is best for you. So Audra, if you put up the other poll question, I'd like to know, do you guys know if there's an expert on your campus or, at your institution, or do you have a go-to person that can help you with some of these things? Oh, Lori, I'm so sorry. You don't know how to find them, or you don't know where they're at, or they're not being marketed well on your particular campus. I realize I've been with Penn State for a long time, but I feel like they're really good about marketing that and inviting everybody. Good. I'm really happy to see that a lot of people have experts or go-to people. I hope you're able to find them if you don't know who they are. And I'm sorry if you're not sure. That's really, really tough, especially if you're facing a deadline or something along those lines. But something else that kind of was brought to my attention was, just because you have these ongoing trainings, are they really beneficial? Are they really worth the time to take from all of our busy schedules to sit through them? Is it something that you find is worth that effort and not getting something else crossed off of your to-do list that day? And then obviously the format. What does that look like at your institution? I'd love to hear what other people are being offered, because I think sometimes it needs to be more than just, here's a video, here's a YouTube. One thing that I think somebody's trying to start on our campus is kind of that mentor program, and having that go-to person that you're not necessarily going to feel dumb in front of, that when you have these questions or you're not sure what to do in those situations. Does anybody have that at their campus?
Hey, Erica. I just want to mention there's a couple people in the chat that were kind of mentioning that the ongoing trainings or the trainings period are just kind of videos that have been posted to a website, and they have access to those videos. But what I've seen, especially in my institution, is that we have we use InfoEd, but we have a manual that we can go to and, see how to do certain things, but that manual is not always up to date. And so, some of those options that we have as far as access to training, access to materials, to be able to use these electronic systems efficiently, they're just not helpful, in the everyday, in the here and now, because they're outdated, or, just kind of, we need something that we can kind of go to and say, I have this specific need or this specific issue, where can I go to fix it? Or how can I find instructions to get me through it? I know personally, there's parts of our system that I found out about from an old coworker that went to another institution, and they use the same system. And apparently that institution uses certain functions that we don't use. So I thought that was very interesting. And then of course, staying in contact with, your colleagues is a very helpful way to be able to, know what's up to date with the systems that you have.
That's such great information, Brittney. I love the idea of even starting your own. Minessa used the support group earlier. I think it's great to have something between your other research administrators, some little support group or these go-to people. I apologize, we are running out of time, but I'm going to turn everything over to Roger and Kelly just for some open questions. And thank you everybody for attending this afternoon.
Thanks, Erica. This was such a really great discussion. Do we, for everything, and I think our committee probably has some other topics that we can lead into for the next while based on all of the great conversation we've had. So does anyone have any other thoughts that haven't been going on in the chat, which is again great, or comments, questions about what we've talked about so far? So Kristen would like to know if the chat will be available in addition to the recording. We are saving it, so I would, maybe.
It's a good chat. Like, I rarely do I say Zoom chats like this is such a good chat, but like this is a really good chat.
I guess I'll give it the research administration thing. It depends. I think it only publishes the everyone comments, so I guess we would have to see if there were private comments in there that people were doing that. You know.
I think it's worth highlighting the comment that Irene Kenny made a couple of minutes ago, about creating a research administration sort of work group to share helpful hints and sort of informal training. And I think that's really valuable at institutions because as you know, as we were saying earlier, you know, sometimes training is out of date, formal training is out of date. Sometimes people leave and the information doesn't pass down. So having those sort of informal methods of transferring that information and sharing it, I think are really valuable.
I agree. It looks like Elizabeth Benefield may have a question.
Not so much as a question, but we have several different things that we have incorporated in our official training time. So we have different videos, we have recordings. We also incorporate one-on-one desk time or shadow times with our people that are new. And we also have time incorporated into the training schedule for them to meet with the managers, but also with a cohort of coworkers that can answer any questions or bring up any topics that they've gone over for the training during that week. And also an opportunity for them just to get to know other people and have that built-in system of knowing somebody that they can reach out and ask questions to. But one thing that we started outside of the formal training is we have a help channel within Teams, and anybody can post a question or a comment and anybody can answer that, and it can be done by multiple people. So you're being able to use the expertise and knowledge across 60 people instead of just specific people. And that seems to have worked really well.
Katie Plum has a question. The post-award project management seems to be the biggest challenge for us. How are folks using ERA systems and with their PIPDs and to help with project management? I would say myself, I use my PIs don't necessarily understand the reports that our system shares with us. So I have to, again, use an Excel spreadsheet to change it for what they are looking for. A lot of ours are looking for a burn rate and also forecasting how much they can spend, you know, how much left they have to spend, or when the burn rate, of course, is when they're going to run out of money. But and so I have to do those kind of in Excel, and I would love the system to do that, but I don't know if everyone manages that the same way that I do. So I don't know if it's specified.
And I would just throw out there that, if you look across different systems that are out there, you'll find different approaches to this. Some systems really don't provide a lot of post-award functionality at all, because many institutions just prefer to handle that all through their financial system, which, as everyone understands, on the research administration side, the financial system really just is inadequate in that regard, just as Kelly was saying. But then there are other systems that do offer sort of a bespoke functionality around post-award management, including things like burn rate reports and being able to make projections and so forth. So I think it's important to look around, if that is important, look around at what systems are out there and what those systems, when you're looking at them, make sure you ask what the system does in that regard. There are some.
I think there's something to add on to that. I think there's also an element of, optimization within our own workflows. So like the system itself may not be able to provide you with the things that you're looking for, but when it comes to project managing the post-award side, like the way that because I work between a lot of different, I've worked between different institutions, different places. I have to keep track of the things that I need to get done for various projects, but all in one place. And so I use a project management system like Asana or Trello or something like that to make sure that I have a workflow process. And that if I am working with other people, right, I can assign things to them. So it's almost like a shadow project management system, because that's, in some cases, that's a more effective way to do your project management. The other thing that I would recommend is breaking down your post-award activities into the segmented spaces. So like when I needed extra support, I would figure out, okay, if I'm going to be doing giant cleanup, there's certain things that I have to be the one who does, right? And then what kind of administrative support or additional support can I find to handle some of these other things? The PI may be able to, the PI's assistant may be able to handle some of the more administrative tasks, not like the actual work. Like back in the day, they could photocopy everything or something. But those are the things that, when we're dealing with something non-systems related to support a system that you may need additional support for, that's the direction I would go in, is bolstering it with external systems. Did everything really just go quiet? It's like I totally just mic dropped. I know what I said was just so brilliant that everybody is just shocked. You're still coming to terms with it. I think it's hard to build a robust post-award system because the answer is so often it depends. It's hard to write software when the variables change so frequently. Absolutely. Which is, somebody mentioned that earlier in terms of like the expense of updating a lot of the systems, because you keep having to update it according to the forms or the rules or what have you.